Cool. My name's Darren Wallace, and I'm lead systems engineer with DataJar. Maybe I should ask my title to be changed to Adobe Deployment Engineer. You can find me in most places, Slack, Twitter, etc. as Daz_Wallace. I've been working with Macs now for probably just over 15 years, starting out as a hardware tech, right through to consultancy and now systems engineering. I also help run the London MacAdmins, so if you're ever over in the UK, give us a shout. At DataJar, we help organizations to manage their Apple devices, whether that be an initial setup, training, hybrid, or full MSP, with a roughly 50-50 split between education and business, with education just edging it. The point of this is that we're dog fooding. The things I'm going to talk about, we're already doing for our customers. And today, I'm talking about Adobe in education, specifically around shared device licenses and 2020. This talk is an updated version of the talk I gave last year. Due to some time constraints, I won't be going to as much detail as last year, but the areas I'm glossing over are still valid from that talk, so feel free to use that for a deeper dive. This talk will look to cover the above areas, a recent history of Adobe releases, core changes between the previous device license and the newer shared device license, a high-level migration process, package creation and deployment, and some general maintenance tasks. Also, a glossary. We'll be using a lot of shortened terms in these slides, so I thought it'd be handy to have a glossary before we get stuck in. Secondly, I'll have a link to a blog post at the end. This will have a copy of the slides, as well as a link dump of URLs, so don't rush to take notes. Lastly, as mentioned, there's a question box to type questions, so feel free to use that, and I think we're going to do these after the session. First things first, a little history lesson. In the beginning, there was the Creative Suites with a number of different versions. This came with a standard serial number license, and eventually for packaging this, we had the Adobe Application Manager Enterprise Edition. With the launch of Creative Cloud, we switched to using the Creative Cloud Desktop app, or the CCDA. This allowed the introduction of named user licenses and gave us a new tool for packaging, the Creative Cloud Packager. A few years after the launch of CC, Adobe added a new subscription model for multi-user devices called a device license. Early 2019, Adobe released Creative Cloud 2019. With this, the serial number license and device license was replaced with a new shared device license program. This new license was designed for education use on lab and multi-user devices, allowing them to be able to access some cloud-based services. With this, we also had a new packaging solution, the Adobe Admin Console, removing the requirement of a dedicated OS-specific packaging application at the cost of some features. And October 2019, we had the release of Adobe 2020. Note the removal of the CC term from that name. This also brought the minimum OS up from macOS High Sierra 10.13 from a previous macOS 10.12 we have with CC 2019. So now we have this new licensing model, the Shared Device License, or SDL. Let's compare that to previous license models so you can see some differences. First up, license expiry or validity length. So serial number licenses will depend on your agreement with Adobe or resellers, but all of those should expire by 2021, replaced by shared device licenses. Named user license, they tend to be monthly or yearly, but it will depend on what option you went for when you kind of ordered those. Device licenses, these will typically be yearly, but again, these will be finishing up around 2021, if not already for you guys. And they've been replaced by this shared device license. And lastly, that shared device license would typically be yearly and would be the only real shared device license model going forward. Compatibility, so serial number licenses will work for most versions of the suite from 2018 and older. Named user licenses will work with most of the Creative Cloud suite, if not all. Device licenses will work with most of the CC suite up until about CC 2018. And shared device licenses will only work with 2019 and newer. As 2019 and newer is the only suite supported on macOS Catalina, that means you'll need either NUL or SDL, that's named user license, or shared device license, with a minimum of CC 2019 for any devices running Catalina or newer. Also worth pointing out is that VDI is not supported with SDL. Next up, access to cloud features. So this includes items such as cloud-based assets, storage, fonts, images, and libraries. As expected, the serial number license and device license will not have the access to these resources at all, whereas the named user license and the shared device license does. Related to that, whether they require an Adobe ID and login in order to use the application. Again, serial number and device licenses do not require an end user to log into an Adobe account, whereas the named user license and the shared device license will do. Talking of Adobe IDs, there's three core types you'll probably encounter. There's your standard Adobe ID, an Enterprise ID, and a federated ID. The differences between each type are detailed at that link shown, but in summary, you won't be able to control aspects like password policies for standard Adobe IDs, Adobe Enterprise and Federated. With Enterprise and Federated IDs, the organization retains control of the account, whereas with a standard Adobe ID, the end user always will. In much the same way, the data created is owned by the end user if they use an Adobe ID, but the organization retains ownership with Federated or Enterprise. And with Adobe IDs, the end user will create their account. With Enterprise IDs, end users can optionally create their own account if you wish, and with Federated, you will need to provision the account somehow. The main advantage of Federation is that you can use a number of SSO or SAML providers to unify the authentication experience, making the usage a little easier. So we covered the changes from the new license types, as well as the different Adobe IDs you may use. Let's talk about your migration process. From a high level, this is likely to be creating your Adobe Directory, optionally setting up SAML SSO, adding your Adobe Domain, adding your users, and purchase and/or enabling the shared device license. So firstly, you'll need to create an Adobe Directory to store user information for Enterprise or Federated IDs. The steps for this are pretty simple, and I've included a link above, as well as a screenshot. Previously, this could take up to 48 hours to provision your directory, so it's worth starting this sooner rather than later. Next up is to optionally configure SSO and SAML integration. If you're using Microsoft Azure or Google Federation, Adobe has dedicated guides for these. For other solutions, Adobe do provide generic instructions. Recently, Adobe added the ability for both the Azure and Google connectors to automatically provision user accounts in your Adobe portal, instead of you having to do this manually or via other methods. If you already have Azure or Google Federation configured, I'm afraid you currently can't add in this user provisioning feature unless you remove all of your current accounts in the solution. But a migration path has been stated as coming in for Azure in a future release. A last-minute addition to this, literally from this morning, for some current identity provider connections, you may be using SHA-1 certificates. These are not supported from the end of October this year, so start replacing these in your Adobe console ASAP. Log into your console and check the identity section to see an alert and details if you are affected. Right, back to the step-by-step. Next up is to add your domain or domains that users will be authenticating from. This will require some DNS records to be created, so ensure to have the correct administrator on hand. Last point, if you're using the Azure AD connector or Google Federation sync, you do not need to manually add your domain. Selected domains from the IDP setup are automatically synchronized over. Now, after all that, time to add your users. This isn't strictly needed if users will be using Adobe IDs or Enterprise IDs, as users can create these themselves. It also can be skipped if you're going to be using the Azure or Google Federation for user provisioning, as we mentioned. Adobe do provide a free tool for this process called the User Sync tool, which can sync data from LDAP into your admin console. This is highly recommended. I'll add a link to the Sound Mac guy, aka Neil Martin. He has a blog post on the matter into the link dump, and that's a great resource, and I'd definitely recommend having a read of that if you're interested. Lastly, if you can't use any of these methods, the only two options you have left are to manually create the users in the admin portal or upload CSV files with the required data. So lastly, you'll need to buy and or activate your shared device licenses in the admin console. Don't forget, this is a one-way migration. Once you click that migrate button, there's no going back to device licenses. Additionally, any active device licenses you have out there in the field will stop working after 30 days once you click this migrate button. So don't click it until you're ready. You can complete every other step up until this point, and then wait to initiate this migration until you're ready, perhaps tie in with a rollout of the software. Right, so you've got all the back-end stuff sorted. Now it's moving to actually creating and deploying the things. So you no longer use a locally installed application to create your deployment packages. Gone is the AAMEE or CCP of old. Packages are instead created via the Adobe Admin Web Console under the Packages tab. One new benefit of this, you can actually create packages for Windows via a Mac browser and Mac packages via a Windows browser. To get around the newer quarantine attribute being added to installer packages if you download these via a web browser, Adobe now have you download a downloader app, which you then use to download the package. This did throw out a lot of admins at first and occasionally still does. As previously, we would strongly suggest creating a package per application you wish to deploy, aka the Highlander rule. This will give you the most flexibility with deployments and patching, as well as minimizing issues. For example, if each app install has the same risk of failing, having lots of app installs in a single package will multiply that risk. One new addition with SDL is the file sync. This provides access to Adobe Cloud storage in the same way as Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, etc. It's also required to use features such as cloud libraries and cloud fonts. Additional to that, the non-classic version of Lightroom and Adobe Rush will require Adobe File Sync to be enabled. But if you do wish to disable this and not offer it to your users, you'll see the setting in the options area of the package creation wizard in the admin console. For the deployment itself, we'd recommend doing this when a user isn't logged in. This is mostly due to the large number of possible blocking processes and apps that can cause the install to fail or cause issues with deployed applications. This blocking list can be pretty long, so installing at the login window kind of gets around that most easily. Additionally, if a device is set to login window, you know someone's not good in the middle of using, say, Photoshop, and then you want to patch over the top of it. So it's a nice little freebie there. For us, we use an open source solution. It's Munki, driven by Jamf, aka Jamjar, which some of you may have heard of. I'll add a link into the link dump for this if you want to get some more information on that, but it is an open source tool in that one. Talking about deploying a login window, it can have its own issues, as anyone who's seen my blogs knows. Basically, any installation of Creative Cloud 2019 or 2020 would fail if run at the login window on macOS Catalina. It was a huge issue highlighted in the Adobe channel on Slack. It took about 6 or 7 months to get sorted and affected a lot of admins. Oh, sorry, wrong slide. At the end of May, over 7 months after the release of macOS Catalina, that specific issue is now resolved. Last little section on this talk, maintenance. This kind of covers any ongoing and or miscellaneous tasks or scenarios you might come across. So first of all, removing older applications. So for some scenarios, there actually isn't a need to remove the older apps. But if you do wish to, there's 4 main options. The first one you've got is the old Nuke and Pave. So wipe the device and redeploy it with the new versions of Adobe. The second option is to use an uninstall installer package. So almost all Creative Cloud packages and the admin console built packages will come with an uninstaller package. Simply run this installation on the target devices to uninstall the software. Your third option is a command line uninstaller. So Adobe actually installs a binary that can perform command line uninstalls of their products. Using it requires you to know both the SAP code of the application as well as the correct base version. And a hint there, it's not going to be the major suite version. So it won't be like CC 2019 or anything nice and easy, unfortunately. I'll include a link to a KB article on how to use the command line uninstaller in the link dump as well. Your last option on here is a kind of remove all the things uninstaller. So you can actually use the Creative Cloud Packager tool to build a custom uninstaller package that can literally uninstall all of the Adobe apps. I've detailed this in an old blog post, which I've also going to add to the link dump that will go up after this talk. Okay, say if you didn't want to remove your older apps, how would you go about deploying shared device licensing over the top of your previous installs? So if you're deploying newer 2020 versions of the apps over the top of a Creative Cloud 2019 deployment, you should be fine. Those will just work together nicely. If you're deploying shared device license packages on top of named user license installs of older than 2019, this should be fine. What it will do is it will convert any 2020 and 2019 apps to shared device license and should retain the named user license for the older apps. But please do test this. If you're deploying shared device license packages on top of serial number license packages for older apps, that should be fine. It should set up, again, CC 2019 and 2020 as shared device license, and it should retain the serial number license for the older apps, as long as that serial number license hasn't expired. Previously, there was some reports that doing this process or that scenario will actually remove the serial number license from your older apps, but it's not meant to. So if you do come across this, please raise a support ticket with Adobe. If you're looking to deploy shared device license apps on top of a device license deployment, please don't. Those device licenses are going to expire 30 days after you migrate to shared device license. So you'll just end up with a bunch of older apps that are unlicensed, and probably a lot of tickets and phone calls, I imagine. Right, so when building your packages, you can make a number of changes to the options for end users. These include things like allowing file sync or disabling it, as well as locking self-service, the CCDA, out for end users performing their own app installs and updates. Whichever way you go with that, if you later on decide that you change your mind and you want to change those options, you can actually modify the server config XML that lives at that path shown. Both Ben Toms, aka Mac Mule, and Neil Martin, aka Sound Mac Guy, cover this in blog posts that I'll add to the link dump. What about updating packages? So when you create your package, it'll be downloadable for up to 3 days before it'll expire, and you'll have to recreate it from scratch. These will show in the console as expired. However, if the contents of the package becomes out of date, for example, the version of Photoshop in a package has had a new release, these will show up in your console as not up to date. If you select these packages, the console will walk you through creating a new up-to-date package as shown here. Be warned, if you're making packages for older major versions of apps, such as Photoshop 2019, these will always show as out of date, even if the only update is a major version upgrade, for example, from 2019 to 2020. Last one on updating packages is to do with auto package. No, I'm afraid we still can't just use auto package recipes to grab new versions of Adobe apps and import them like we used to. But at DataJar, we built a set of custom scripts, processes, and recipes that will allow you to import downloaded packages into Munki and Jamf with the correct versioning and installation checks, that kind of thing. Again, I'll add a link to the 2019 and 2020 auto package recipes into the link dump for people to grab if they wish. It is also worth pointing out that you can be automatically notified of updated versions of apps that are to be packaged via an email. Under the Packages tab, click Preferences on the left and tick the option under the Notifications section. For DataJar, we have ours going straight into our ticketing system, which one of our system engineers could pick up and run with, whoever normally draws the shortest straw. Right, what about updating SDL? So it is indeed possible to update the shared device license resources you have installed on devices. You can either create completely new installer packages with all of your apps and redeploy these, which would include the updated components, or you can literally just create a package with no apps added and deploy that out. This is occasionally needed to get access to newer features that Adobe are adding to the shared device license. For example, the earlier versions of shared device license had a 90-minute timeout prompt that had the end user confirm they were still the same person that was sitting in front of the Mac and logged into the Adobe apps. This 90-minute timeout prompt paused any render jobs in progress. Not helpful if you're doing any overnight rendering. With shared device license version 1.5 in August, Adobe removed this timeout. On the subject of timeouts and logging into Adobe accounts, there is currently no method to force a sign out of the local Adobe apps, nor to configure an auto sign out option. This isn't an issue if you're using different local or network accounts per device, but if you're using a single shared account, you're going to hit it. If you need this functionality, please do log a feature request with impact numbers at that link shown above. Also reference CCD-9875 to link your feature requests with other FRs covering the same area. With the current pandemic still at the forefront of people's minds, just a reminder, before I go any further as well, I was hoping this slide would be a lot happier and nicer, but unfortunately not. Adobe did allow the use of shared device licenses for students on their home computers from the end of March this year. Students needed to have their Adobe IDs registered in your admin console, and you had to fill in a form. This was extended to the 6th of July, but has now expired, and these installations will revert to trials in most cases. For more information, check out the link shown. That will give you an idea of your options here on that one. So all of this can be a lot to take in, and sometimes you need help, and you have a few options here. First of all, the one you don't pay for, but often gets you a faster response, the MacAdmins Slack, and specifically the Adobe channel. Come join us in there. Sometimes you'll get answers, sometimes you'll get someone to commiserate with. Your second option on here is the Adobe KB articles. So Adobe have a large range of lengthy KBs on all things shared device license. And to give credit, they're actually pretty good. Certainly worth the read, and I'll add a bunch to the link dump following this. One I'd strongly suggest keeping an eye on is the Shared Device Licensing What's New page. This is frequently updated with tweaks and changes to the shared device license. The third option here is a support call or a chat. These are accessible from within your admin console. If you're having difficulty getting the shared device license side of things set up, you can request an expert session and book in a time slot to go through things with the support rep. Last thing on here is blogs and talks, like this one. I had a bunch of recommendations into the link dump that are worth kind of spending the time reviewing before and during your migration. So thanks for listening to me ramble on for a bit. As mentioned, there'll be a feedback link in the Slack channel later today, so please do leave some feedback. Otherwise, I don't learn. I also added a link to a matching blog post that should have just gone live. This will have a copy of the slides as well as the link dump itself. With that, I'm finished.
Well, fantastic presentation. Thank you, Darren. We do have a couple questions. So let's see, and feel free to, if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to throw them out here. Do you know if SDL will be available for non-educational Adobe Enterprise Creative Cloud customers, or is SDL only for educational customers?
It is only for educational, but there is a thing called a feature restrictive license or something similar. Talk to your Adobe reps or resellers. They should be able to put you in touch with the right people. It's not something I've had personal experience of, but I know a few people in the Adobe channel have as well. So it might be worth asking about that. That's probably your kind of equivalent.
Okay, great. Let's see, is it possible to set the local Creative Cloud app on a machine to just install updates automatically rather than distributing update packages manually?
You can make them available to the end user to install, but there is a third option, and that's the Remote Update Manager, or RUM. Again, not had too much experience with that because we work in a different way, but it's a command line tool you can use to update minor versions of the apps. So it won't do, say, Photoshop 19 to 20, but it would do the incremental updates. It also adds a load of other features like a local update server, controlling of updates, things like that.
Okay, great. Let's see now. If you could look into a crystal ball and tell us, why does Adobe hate us?
Great. Yeah. I think I had a quote mistaken slide that was in there that probably sums up my feelings. But yeah, we had seven months of not a great time. We had customers that were desperate to get on Catalina, and we couldn't actually deploy Adobe apps to them. And that went on for 7 months. So you're talking just over half the life cycle of Apple's OSs. You couldn't deploy Adobe apps in an appropriate way, shall we say?
Yeah.
I don't know. Short answer.
Well, would you say they're at least making progress?
Yes, I mean there was a long road they could walk, and I know a few folks from Microsoft have reached out to say, hey, if you want any advice, let us know. I don't want to out him directly, but there is a chap in the Adobe channel who works for Adobe. Out of his own free will, he talks to us, he engages, he's nice. Please don't treat him as if he does represent Adobe, because that's just mean and he'll never come back.
Absolutely. So for Adobe Acrobat Pro, is SDL available still?
I honestly don't know. I believe we've deployed SDL for Acrobat Pro for a few customers and not heard any issues back. Fortunately, I don't deal a huge amount with this specific actual licensing. But as far as I'm aware, it is working. I've not heard any different.
Okay. Very good. Just a comment here from Anonymous, a great presentation. This has been a confusing journey for our institution. Really appreciate the clarity of your walkthrough.
Thank you very much. Happy to be of service.
I would second that as well, for sure. Okay. Doesn't look like there's any further questions. So I think I'll give it a. Okay, here we go. I gave it a couple seconds. Do you think Adobe will have their product in a reasonable state when we get forced onto BS?
That's a weird name of an OS. If I'm being particularly grumpy, I would say the Adobe apps will run absolutely fine. The deployment and management technologies, who knows? It was 7 months this year. Maybe I'll go for 8 next year.
Yeah. Maybe hopefully they go for 6. Yeah. So that's
hopefully
short.
No longer than 6.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Just a point of clarification: SDL is the entire suite, including Acrobat DC. There's no separate SDL for Acrobat DC. Was what we had come in there.
Thank you.
And can we bring back macro media? That was so much easier to deploy. I guess.
Sure, why not?
Another comment about Adobe RUM. It works well for SDLs from somebody else out there. So there we go. All right. So I think that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, Darren, for taking the time to speak today. Really appreciate it. And for delivering today's first presentation.